Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. If you've been with this channel a while, you know the shape of most of the stories we tell here. A man gets lonely. A man gets hopeful. A man crosses half the world for something warm and finds out the hard way that warm and safe are two different things. Today's story has all of that in it, and then some. Stay with it, because this one goes places you won't see coming. The man telling it is Jeff. 63 years old, a welder and fabricator by trade, from Merthyr Tydfil, up in the South Wales valleys, where the works closed and the young people left, and a lot of good men were made quiet by it. Jeff is one of those men. Hands like a bag of spanners, a joke for everything, and underneath it a silence that got very loud after his kids grew up and stopped ringing. He went to the Philippines half for the sun and half to feel needed again. What he walked into was a small house with too many people in it, and two women who each, in her own way, wanted to be the woman of that house. I'll not tell you how it lands. That's his to tell. What I'll say is that the middle of this one gets messy in a way that will make some of you shout at your screens. Two women, one man, one house, and a foundation poured into ground he could never legally own. Before he starts, do me a small favor. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. We read them, and it's a good crowd. If you've ever sent money to someone you'd never stood next to, or built something on a promise, share it below, because someone else needs to hear they weren't the only one. And go on, hit like and subscribe. It genuinely keeps the lights on here. Quick word before we start. After sitting with this many stories on this channel, we finally did the sensible thing and put together a guide. The questions worth asking before your heart signs anything, the bits of paper to get your hands on, the land and marriage checks that men keep telling us they wish they'd done first. It's sitting in the description if you fancy it. No hard sell, it's just there. Right, that's me done talking. Here's his story, in his own words. I'll tell you the exact moment I knew I was in trouble, and it wasn't grand. I was sat on a plastic stool outside a sari-sari store in a barangay outside Valencia, in Negros Oriental, drinking a warm red horse because the ice hadn't come. And there were two women inside that little house behind me, not speaking to each other. And both of them were, in their own quiet way, mine. And I thought, Jeffrey, you daft old article, how in God's name did a welder from Merthyr end up here? But that's the end of the middle. Let me go back a bit. I made things for a living. Steel, mostly. Fabrication, welding, the sort of work where you finish a day, and there's a thing in front of you that wasn't there in the morning, and it'll hold. 40-odd years of that. I was good. I'll say that plain because there's little enough I'll boast about. I could lay a bead of weld you could photograph. The trouble is, you can't weld a family back together, and God knows I'd have tried if there was a rod for it. The works went the way everything went up our way. Slow, then all at once. And by then, the kids were grown anyway. Our Ryan's down in Bristol does something with insurance I've never fully understood. Our Bethan went the whole hog. Perth, Western Australia, married an Aussie, two little ones I've met through a phone screen. Their mam and I split long before that. No drama. We just ran out of things to say, and one of us finally admitted it. So it was me and the house. A 2-up, 2-down in Merthyr, with the heating I didn't put on till November on principle. And here's the thing nobody warns you about, that silence. It's not the big grief. It's the small one. It's a Sunday, where nobody rings, and then another Sunday, and you tell yourself they're busy, they've got lives. That's what you raised them to have. And you're right. And it still hollows you out like a spoon in a boiled egg. Let me tell you about the work, because it's the only thing I ever properly understood. A weld is a promise. You melt two bits of steel and a rod into one. And if you've done it right, there's no join anymore. There's just steel. One piece where there were two, and it'll take a load and never tell a soul how it was made. I did handrails, staircases, gates, bits for machines, structural stuff for the units up the industrial estate. I did a set of gates once for a chapel in Aberdare that are still hanging, and I drive past them sometimes just to look, which our Bethan says is the saddest thing she's ever heard. And I say no. Love, the saddest thing is that they'll outlast me, and nobody'll know whose hands. That's a welder for you. We're not built for talking. We're built for the thing that holds after we've gone quiet. The divorce was a long time back, and I'll not dress it up as a tragedy because it wasn't one. Sian and me were kids when we married, and by the time the kids weren't kids anymore, we'd become two people minding the same house and not much else. She met a fella from Bridgend at a christening, and I can't even be angry, because he talks, see? He's one of those that talks, and I never was. She's happy. Good luck to her. I mean that most days. It's the kids that did the damage, and here's the cruel bit. They didn't do anything. That's what nobody tells you. Ryan and Bethan are good, decent people who I raised to go out into the world and not need me, and they did exactly that. And it worked. And it was like handing someone a saw and being surprised when the plank comes in two. Bethan's 12,000 miles off with the little ones. Ryan's an hour and a half down the M4, and it may as well be Perth for how often the phone lights up. I'd sit in that kitchen with the radio on for the noise of a human voice, and I'd think, I have done my job so well that I have made myself surplus. Nobody warns you that's the reward. I wasn't after a young one. I want that on the record, because I know how it looks. 60-odd, going to the Philippines. You lot are already picturing it. I just wanted somebody to be glad I walked in a room. That's the whole of it. Somebody to make 2 cups of tea without thinking. It was a fella from the rugby club put the idea in my head, if I'm honest. Big Di went out to Cebu and came back looking 10 years younger and talking rubbish about how a smile out there is a smile, not a transaction. Half of what Di says is bollocks. But I went home and I made myself a mug of tea in a cold kitchen, and I thought, well, what am I saving myself for? So I got on one of the sites. Filipino Cupid, it was. I felt a proper fool doing it. A man my age, hunting and pecking at a phone with one finger, putting up a photo our Bethan took of me at a wedding where I looked almost human. I nearly deleted it twice. I'm glad I'm the stubborn sort, or nearly glad, depending on the day you catch me. And that's where Rosalie found me. Or I found her. I've never been sure which, and that uncertainty turns out to matter more than I knew. She was 38. A face that did the thing faces do when they're not performing. A bit tired around the eyes. A real laugh. Crooked tooth on one side she was shy of. She wasn't one of these ones with the studio photos. She had a picture of herself at a fiesta with rice on her cheek, laughing at whoever held the camera. I like that more than I can tell you. It looked like a Tuesday. It looked like a life. She lived outside Valencia, up the hill from Dumaguete, with her mam. Separated, she said, from a husband who'd gone off to Manila years back and never sent a peso. She sold a bit of this and that, loads, snacks, second-hand clothes she got in bales. She wasn't asking me for anything. That's the part one keep coming back to. In those first weeks, she never once asked. She asked about the valleys. She asked why my kids didn't ring. And she was the first person in years who let me not answer and didn't push. We got into a rhythm. Good morning from her when it was the middle of my night. Good evening from me. Video calls on Messenger where the picture froze and we'd laugh at my face stuck gurning. She'd walk me round with the camera. The goats, the neighbor's rooster, she hated. her ma'am waving a wooden spoon. It felt like being let into something. There was one call, about 6 weeks in, that I think about more than the rest. It was late my end, gone midnight, and I couldn't sleep. And I rang her not expecting an answer, and she picked up on the second ring like she'd been sat by the phone. She was on the concrete step outside the house with a candle, because the power was off. Brownout, they call it, happens all the time out there. And she held the candle up to her face and asked me to tell her about snow, because she'd never seen it. And I sat in a cold house in Merthyr, describing snow to a woman on the other side of the world, by candlelight. And I thought, if a scammer went to this much bother, she'd deserve the money. That's the sort of thing I told myself. I got very good at telling myself things. She'd let me see the ordinary. That's what got under my guard. It wasn't glamour. It was her ma'am shouting something in Cebuano off camera, and Rosalie rolling her eyes. It was the neighbors' karaoke, starting up at 9 in the morning with somebody murdering a Whitney Houston number. It was her showing me the price of rice going up at the market, and worrying about it out loud. She never performed a fantasy at me. She showed me a life that was hard and warm and real, and she let me imagine myself into the middle of it. And I'll tell you, for a man who'd been surplus, being imagined into the middle of something is a powerful drug, more powerful than any pretty picture. I've thought about that a lot since. The clever ones don't sell you a dream. They sell you a Tuesday, and let you do the dreaming yourself. 3 months of that, and I'd stopped feeling like a fool. I felt like a man with somewhere to be. I should have asked more, right at the start, about the husband, about who else was in that house. I didn't. I was too busy being warm for the first time in years to want to know what the warmth cost. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I booked the flight in the January, told our Ryan I was going on holiday. Didn't tell him where exactly. A man's allowed his secrets, especially the embarrassing ones. The flight out is a punishment for old men. Cardiff to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Manila. A night in a hotel near the airport with the aircon rattling like a dying tumble dryer, then a little propeller plane down to Dumaguete that had me gripping the seat like a girder. But then the door opened at Sibulan, and the heat came in, that wet, green, diesel and frangipani heat. And I stopped being tired. I was 62, and I felt about 9. She was at the little airport in a yellow dress. And here's a thing about my own daftness. I'd half convinced myself on the plane that nobody would be there, that I'd been mugged off by a lad in a call center somewhere. She was there. She saw me and put both hands over her mouth, and then she was crying and laughing at the same time. And I stood there in my Marks and Spencer's shirt, sweating through it, thinking, well, Jeff, there's no coming back from this now. We got a tricycle, me folded into it like a deck chair, knees round my ears, into Dumaguete, and she took me down the Rizal Boulevard by the sea, where the whole town walks of an evening, and bought me a proper cake at Saint Rival, and I paid for nothing that first day because she wouldn't let me. I noticed that. I want you to know, I noticed the good things too, because it wasn't all a con. That's the bit that took me longest to understand. We drove up the hill to the barangay the next day. Rough concrete road that gave out to dirt, banana and coconut. Kids playing basketball on a court that was just a hoop nailed to a coconut palm and a patch of dust. Her ma'am's place was a small thing. Half concrete block, half plywood and tin. A bahay kubo bit on the side. Chickens under the house. And they came out to meet me like I was somebody. Her ma'am, Perla, took my 2 hands in hers and said God had answered a prayer, and she looked like she meant it. Her brother Boyette, shy, wouldn't look at me. And there was another woman, older, holding a little boy of about 5 on her hip. That was Davina, Rosalie's cousin, they said. Just helping out. Just for now. That first evening up the hill goes down as one of the best of my life. And I'll not let the rest of the story take it off me. They'd killed a chicken for me, a proper thing. That, out there, you don't kill a chicken for nobody. And there was rice and a bit of pork, adobo and pancit. And San Miguel kept cold in a bucket of water, because the fridge was more of an idea than a fridge. The men drank Tandwe rum out of one shared glass, passing it round, which is the custom, and they made me take my turn and roared laughing when I pulled a face. Somebody had a guitar. The kids stared at the hair on my arms like I was a dog that had learned to sit at the table. And Perla kept ladling more onto my plate and pressing my hand and saying, "Blessing, blessing," and I felt about as far from that cold kitchen in Merthyr as a man can get and still be on the same planet. I want you to hold on to that, because when I tell you the money side, you'll want to make them into pantomime villains, and it wasn't that. These were poor people who'd opened their house and their pot to a stranger with pale legs, and most of the warmth was real. That's what makes the whole thing so hard to be angry about, even now. If it had all been fake, it would have been easy. It's the fact that most of it wasn't that keeps me up. I remember she looked at me a beat too long and then smiled very wide, and I thought nothing of it. Why would I? I was the luckiest old fool in Negros, and the San Miguel was cold, and somebody had put a plate of lechon in my hands before I'd sat down. I stayed 3 weeks that first trip. In a little pension in Dumaguete she'd found me, near Robinson's. Cheap, clean, aircon that worked. About 800 pesos a night. Call it 11, 12 pound. I'd go up the hill on a hobble, the motorbike taxi, clinging to the driver like a limpet, and spend the day at the house being fed and fussed. I was properly happy. I need you to understand that, before I tell you the rest, or none of the rest, makes sense. Here's how it started with money, and I want to be careful telling it, because if I tell it wrong, you'll think I'm a mug and she's a villain, and it was never that clean. She didn't ask. Perla got sick. A chest thing, a real one, you could hear it. They took her down to the hospital in Dumaguete, and I went along and sat on a plastic chair in a corridor that smelled of bleach and somebody's rice. And when the bill came, it was about 4,000 pesos, and Rosalie was counting coins out of a little purse with her hands shaking. 50-odd quid, that was. I paid it before I'd thought about it. You would have. Anybody with a pulse would have. And that felt good. That's the trap, see? It felt like being useful. 40 years of making things that hold. And here was a thing I could hold up with my wallet, and it felt the same in the chest. After that, it became a monthly thing, but slow, the way these things are slow. She never demanded. It was always a situation. Boyette's tricycle needed a new engine part. The load ran out, and she couldn't reach me to say goodnight. Jomar, that's Davina's little boy, needed shoes for school, and there was no way the poor kid was going in flip-flops. I started sending 10,000 pesos a month through the G-Cash. 140 pound, give or take. I told myself it was less than I'd have spent on a season ticket for football I didn't even go to anymore. And that was true. And it was also the first rung of a ladder I didn't know I was on. Understand the culture a bit, and you'll see why I couldn't just say no, and why they weren't wrong to expect. Out there, family isn't the little tight unit we have. It's everybody. And there's this thing, utang na loob, a debt of gratitude, a thing you owe someone who helped you, that you carry your whole life. When Perla called me anak, son, she meant it. I was in the family now, and family carries family. To them, a man with a UK pension who wouldn't help was a man with no shame. And some part of me, the part that had been ringing a phone that never rang back, drank that up like a man in a desert. I was needed. Do you know how long it had been since I was needed? Rosalie went to Mass every Sunday and prayed for us, and I don't for 1 second think that was fake. She'd light a candle and cross herself and grab my hand in that church that was just a big shed with a tin roof and fans, and I'd stand there, a chapel-raised Valley's boy who'd not prayed since the pit disasters we sang about in school, feeling something I'd no name for. I went back to Wales after that first trip, and the house had never been colder. 3 weeks of being fussed and fed and called anak, and then a taxi from Cardiff Airport to a 2-up, 2-down, where the milk had gone off and the only message on the machine was the dentist. I sat on the stairs with my coat still on, and I cried, which I'd not done since my father's funeral. And I'm only telling you, because if you've felt that particular cold, you'll know it, and if you haven't, I can't explain it. Within the hour, I was on the phone booking the next flight. That's how it works. It's not that they trick you out there. It's that they've got something you go home to the absence of, and the absence does the selling for them. So the second trip and the third came quick, and the support settled into that monthly rhythm. And here's the thing about the situations, as they called them. Some were completely real. Perla's chest was a real thing. I sat in that corridor. The market prices were real. Boyer's tricycle really did need the part. Out there, on nothing a month, there is always genuinely a situation, because a life lived that close to the edge is nothing but situations, one after another, forever. So you can't even tell yourself it's all invented. Some of it's the plain arithmetic of being poor. The trouble is, you stop being able to tell the plain arithmetic from the other kind, and by the time you're trying to, you're already the family bank, and a bank doesn't get to ask why. The house came up on the third trip, and it came up gentle, which is how the expensive things always come. We were sat outside of an evening, the light going that fast tropical way it goes, and she said, "Wouldn't it be nice? Somewhere that was ours, not her mam's crowded little place. Somewhere with a proper CR and tiles, and a room where I could put my things and not live out of a bag in a pension in town." And I want to tell you, I asked the right questions. I didn't. I asked the wrong ones. I asked how big and where and how soon. I didn't ask the only one that mattered, which was, whose name is the land in, Jeff? And can it ever, under any law on God's earth, be yours? Because here's what I only half knew and fully ignored. A foreigner cannot own land in the Philippines. Full stop. Not a square foot. I'd read it, the way you read the warning on a ladder. The land was Perla's, a scrap of family land up the hill. And the plan, when I finally understood the plan, was that I'd pay to build a house on it, and it would be in Rosalie's name, and I'd be trusting a 50-year-old promise made under a mango tree. The whole build, done modest, was going to be about 1.2 million pesos. I sat in the pension with a pad of paper doing the sum like the fabricator I am. Takeoffs, materials, labor, and it came out at roughly £17,000. Now, that's most of what I have. I'm not a rich man. I've got the state pension, about £880 a month, and I had, at that point, around £22,000 saved from a lifetime of not going out much. So 1.2 million pesos wasn't a mansion. Out there, it's a decent block bungalow, tiles, 2 bedrooms, a proper toilet. But to me, it was nearly everything. And I knew it. So I didn't pay for the house. Not the whole house. That's the one bit of sense I hung on to in all this. And it's the bit that saved me. So if you take nothing else, take that. I said I'd pay for the start of it. The foundation, the block, the roof frame. A first tranche. 350,000 pesos. About 4,900 pounds. And then we'd see. I told myself we'd see was caution. It was really just fear wearing a hard hat. But it turned out fear was the smartest fella at that table. They broke ground in the March. And I'll tell you, watching that first tranche go into the ground was the happiest I'd been since our Bethan was small. I'm a builder of things at heart. I'd stand up there in the heat with a bottle of water going warm in my hand, watching Boye and 2 lads mix concrete by hand on a sheet of ply, shovel and hoe. No mixer, and I'd want to get in and do it myself. Sometimes I did. 62 years old, stripped to the waist, browning up, laying block with lads a third my age who thought the old Kano was mental and loved me for it. I sent the photos to nobody, because there was nobody to send them to, and that thought only stung a bit now, because I had this. You want to know how a careful man spends the biggest chunk of his savings without ever deciding to? It's never one decision. That's the con of it, even when nobody's conning you. It was a bag of cement here, a delivery of hollow block there, day rates for the lads, a load of sand and gravel that came up the hill on a jeepney with the springs flat. Rosalie kept the money and paid the suppliers, and showed me receipts sometimes, and not others, and I'd hand over another 40,000 pesos, another 20, and each one felt small against the pile, and I never once sat down and thought, right, that's 350,000 gone. That's near enough 5 grand. That's a fifth of everything I have on earth sat in a foundation up a dirt track in Negros. If I'd had to write one check for the lot, I'd have gone pale and gone home. But nobody ever asks you for everything at once. They ask you for a bag of cement, and love, and a bag of cement, and love, until one day you look down, and the wheelbarrow's your whole life. I moved out of the pension and into the half-built house before it had windows, on a camp bed, because I couldn't bear to be away from it. And that's when it started to go wrong. Not with a bang, with arrangements. Davina moved in properly around then. Officially, she was there to look after Perla, who was frail after the chest thing, and to cook and clean while Rosalie ran her little bits of business down in town, which meant Rosalie was away more and more. And Davina was, I have to be fair, brilliant at all of it. The place was spotless. There was always food. Little Jomer started calling me Lolo, Granddad, and God help me, that undid something in me. My own grandkids in Perth didn't know my voice, and here was this little lad in a Barcelona shirt with holes in it climbing on my knee, calling me Granddad. Davina was 42, separated same as Rosalie, harder-faced, sharper. She'd sit with me in the evenings when Rosalie was down in town, and she'd say things. Nothing you could point at. You work so hard, Jeff. She doesn't see. I would never let a man like you sleep on a camp bed. Rosalie is lucky. Does she know she's lucky? Warm hand on the forearm. And I, God forgive me, 62 and starved of it, drank that up and all. The house had 2 women in it now, and neither of them would say a bad word to the other's face. And that's the Filipino thing I understood latest and worst. They don't fight in front of you, Saving face, they call it. You don't have the row in the open. You keep it smooth on top and let it rot underneath. So on the surface, it was all sisters and cousins and passing the rice. And underneath it was a war I couldn't see the front line of. I'd come back from town with pain de sal and find the temperature in that concrete box had dropped 10 degrees, and nobody would tell me why. Davina would be scrubbing something that was already clean. Rosalie would be on her phone, thumb going, not looking up. And I, thick as a docker's sandwich, would say, "Everything all right, girls," and get 2 bright smiles and a "yes, Jeff," and go back to my block laying none the wiser. There was an evening it nearly came out. Rosalie had been down in town 2 nights running, and Davina cooked me a proper feast. Cara, the peanut one, took her half a day, and sat across the little table watching me eat it and said, very quiet, if I was her man, I would not leave him alone in a half-built house to lay his own blocks. And I said, careful now, she's working. And Davina smiled and said, is that what she calls it? And that hung there over the caracar like a smell. I should have chased it. I should have said, what do you mean by that, Davina? Say the thing plainly. I didn't. I ate my peanut stew and let it lie, because chasing it meant one of the 2 of them stopped being kind to me, and I could not bear, right then, to lose a single drop of the kindness. That's the whole disease in one sentence. I'd rather be lied to warmly than told the truth cold. I bought Boyette a motorbike around then, a Honda, second-hand, 75,000 pesos, about £1,000. He needed it for the load business, they said, running deliveries. That was real. He did use it for that. It was also, I see now, a way of buying my way further into being family. And I did it with my eyes half open and told myself it was generosity. Part of me knew. Part of me always knew, and kept the ledger anyway. The way you keep quiet about a rattle in the van because you can't afford what it means. I was up to 15,000 pesos a month by then in support. More when there was a situation. And there was always a situation. Perla's medicines, Jamar's school. A christening we were all obliged to give to. I'd sit with my pad and add it up, and the number kept climbing, and I kept telling myself it was fine. I could carry it. It was less than a lot of blokes spend on nonsense. And that was still true. But I was noticing that the situations from Rosalie and the situations from Davina had started to arrive on different days, like they were taking it in shifts. And I noticed that neither of them liked me noticing. Here's where I have to be honest about myself, because it'd be easy to make out I was just a poor mug being worked. I wasn't just that. There was a stretch there where I liked it. 2 women in one house, both minding me, both, in their different ways, wanting my attention. And after a lifetime of being the man nobody rang, a bit of me swelled up like a bullfrog. I was daft enough to think I was the prize. It took me longer than I'd like to work out I was the pot, not the player. I'll give you the day the penny started to drop, because it wasn't a discovery. It was a Sunday. We'd all gone to Mass down the hill, the whole lot of us packed into a jeepney. And after, the 2 women went off to the market and left me on a bench by the church with Jomar and a warm Coke. And an old fella sat down next to me. A local, spoke lovely English. Turned out he'd worked on the ships, and he looked at the pair of them across the road, Rosalie and Davina, heads together over the fish. And he looked at me, and he said, gentle as anything, sir. Be careful. 2 women, 1 house, 1 wallet. In my experience, the wallet does not last. And he patted my knee and went off, and I sat there with the warm Coke going flat, thinking, cheeky old sod. And then thinking about it the whole jeepney ride home, and then not being able to stop thinking about it. Because once he'd said it out loud, I couldn't unsee the shape of it. The way the requests came in shifts, the way each of them would, without ever quite saying so, run the other down. Rosalie soft and worried. Oh, be careful with Davina. She has debts. Davina blunt? You know Rosalie is not really working, huh? The way they were both, in the end, asking me for the same thing, which was to be chosen and to be paid. And I thought about the money going out the G-cash, and I did what I'd been avoiding for months, which was actually added up, and the number when it came made me put the phone face down on the camp bed like it had bit me. The cracks, when they came the way a weld fails when you've rushed it, not the seam. The little pinholes you didn't see, all lined up. Small things. That's all they ever were, one at a time. Rosalie told me her separation was nearly sorted. The annulment, she called it. And she said it was almost done. Just paperwork, just money for the lawyer. But the timeline moved. First it was nearly finished, then it hadn't really started, then the lawyer had run off with the fee, then it was starting again. And I, being a thick lump who'd never dealt with any of it, didn't know until much later that there is no divorce in the Philippines. None. Only annulment, and it costs the earth 300,000, 400,000 pesos, years of it. And until it's done, she is, in the eyes of the law and the church she prays to every Sunday, still married to a man in Manila. Which meant whatever I thought we were building, we could never legally be married. And she knew that. She had to have known that. Then there was the land. I asked finally to see the title, the tax deck, the actual paper, and it was always coming. Perla's cousin had it. It was at the municipio. It was being processed. I'm a fabricator. You don't start a job without the drawings. And here I was, 350 grand into a build with no drawing anyone would show me. When I finally got a photo of a document off Boye, quietly, without the women knowing, it had a name on it that wasn't Perla's and wasn't Rosalie's. It was an uncle's. The land wasn't even cleanly theirs to give. My foundation was sitting on ground with a knot of family claims round it you couldn't have untangled with a cutting torch. And I'll tell you which small thing tipped it. Because it was nothing. It was a pack of nappies. Davina asked me for money for nappies for a cousin's baby. 400 pesos. Nothing. And that same afternoon, Rosalie asked me, separate, in another room, for money for nappies for the same baby. The same 400 pesos. And in a wealthy man, that wouldn't even register. But I'm a welder from Merthyr, and I've costed every job I've ever done to the last washer. And my head just did what it does. It flagged the double count. 1 baby, 2 nappy bills. And that's when the little pinholes all lined up into a crack you could see daylight through, because if they'd double-billed me for nappies without blinking, what were the big numbers? The ones I couldn't check? The lawyer's fee for the annulment that never moved. The materials that cost more than my takeoff said they should. The land title always at the municipio. I sat with my costing pad, the actual paper pad I'd brought from Wales, and I wrote it all down in 2 columns. What I'd been told and what I could prove, and the proof column was nearly empty. 40 years I'd not start a job without the drawings, and I'd run this one blind, because the foreman was a pretty woman by candlelight. And then the 2 of them started telling me different stories about each other. Rosalie would say, quiet, that Davina had money troubles I didn't know about, that she wasn't to be trusted round the G-cash. Davina would say Rosalie was down in town more than her business could explain, that there was a man, that everyone knew but me. each of them wanting me to pull the other's thread, each of them wanting to be the one left standing in the house I'd paid to start. I didn't find one big lie. That's what I want you younger fellas to understand, because you think it'll be a dramatic thing, a message on a phone, a caught-out moment. It's never that. It was 100 small things that each on their own you could explain, and then one night I lay on that camp bed in a house with no windows, listening to a rooster that couldn't tell the time and the two of them not talking through the block wall. And I did what I do. I ran the numbers. All of them. The annulment that never moved. The title nobody would show me. The stories that didn't square. The shifts they were working. And the numbers didn't add up. And when the numbers don't add up, you don't blame the calculator. You look again at what you fed it. I didn't storm anywhere. I'm not the storming sort. I made a cup of the terrible instant coffee, and I asked Rosalie in the morning, plain, to show me the annulment papers and the land title both that week. Not angry, just a man asking to see the drawings. And that was the tell, mind, because a person with nothing to hide gets the papers. Rosalie cried. Real tears, I think. I still think they were real. That's what makes it hard. She said I didn't trust her, that after everything I thought she was like the others, that her mom would be ashamed of me. Davina, meanwhile, took me aside and said now I could see what Rosalie was. And wasn't it lucky I had her, Davina, who'd never lie to me? And I stood in the middle of that little concrete box I'd paid for, being cried at from one side and courted from the other. And something in me went very cold and very clear, the way it does when you finally see the fault line in a job and know the whole thing has to come apart. I wasn't heartbroken in that minute. That came later, and it came in waves. In that minute, I was just a tradesman looking at bad work, and the bad work was mine as much as theirs. So here's what I did. And this is the part 1/500 want a mate to hear before he does what I nearly did. So listen. First thing, next morning, I went down to Dumaguete on the Habal, and I found a proper lawyer. A real one, a Filipina. Office near the boulevard, aircon and certificates on the wall. Cost me about 5,000 pesos, 70 quid. Best money I spent in that whole country. She told me straight. No softening. A foreigner cannot own that land. Not now, not ever. Not through a wife, not through a company dodge, without it being a fraud that can be taken off him. The house I was building, the second it was on that land, was hers or her family's, not mine. And there was no piece of paper that would change it. And Rosalie could not marry me while she was still married. And getting unmarried would cost more than the house. She looked at me kindly over her glasses and said, Sir, you are not the first, and you will not be the last. But you have come to me before you finished paying, and most do not. Go home and think with the part of you that isn't lonely. That sentence has stayed with me. Think with the part of you that isn't lonely. I walked out of that office onto the boulevard, and the sea was doing its bright, hard thing off toward Cebu, and I felt, of all the daft things, relief. Not heartbreak, not yet. Relief, like when you finally cracked the seized bolt that's had you swearing for an hour. Somebody had finally told me the truth, in a flat voice with certificates on the wall. And the truth, even a hard one, weighs less than not knowing. I sat on a bench by the Rizal Monument, and I ate a whole box of that Sans Rival cake on my own, like a man who'd given something up and was owed a treat. And I rang nobody, because there was still nobody to ring. And for once, that felt less like a wound, and more like just the weather. She'd also told me the practical things, the lawyer, and I'll pass them to you because they're worth more than the whole sad story. Get the tax declaration and the title in your own 2 hands and read the name on it before 1 peso moves. And if the name can't ever be yours, know that going in and price your heart accordingly. Check her civil status at the registry, the PSA. It's a piece of paper anyone can pull. If she's still married, there is no divorce coming, only an annulment that costs more than the house and takes years. Never, ever put the whole build in one go. Stage it, tranche it, keep the power to stop, because the power to stop is the only real power a foreigner's got out there. And keep your own savings in your own name, in your own country. She said, men come to her weeping, who did none of that. And I'd done about one of it by luck, and the rest by fear. And fear had turned out to be the family member who actually had my back. Second thing, I stopped. I did not pay the second tranche. The build stood there at foundation and block, and a bit of roof frame, and it can stand there still for all I care. I'd put in 350,000 for the build, 75 for Boyette's bike, and call it another 60,000 across the year in support and situations. Perla's real medicines in among it, which I don't grudge a peso of. 600,000 pesos, near enough, all in. About 8,500 pounds. And I want to be straight with you about that number, because on this channel, you hear about men losing everything. I didn't lose everything. I lost about 1/3 of what I had, and it hurt. And some of it, the hospital bills, the little lad's shoes, I'd spend again tomorrow. But I did not lose the house in Merthyr. I did not touch the core of the savings. I still had about 13,000 pounds, and my pension, and my trade. I got out with my legs under me, and that, out there, counts as winning. Third thing, and hardest, I refused to be played off. When Rosalie cried, I didn't comfort her against Divina. When Divina courted, I didn't lean her way against Rosalie. The second you pick a side in a triangle like that, you've agreed to be the prize, and the prize always pays. I told them both the same words in the same flat voice. I'm not building any further. The money's stopped, and I'm going back to town. No shouting, no grand speech. I'd learned that shouting was just another way of staying in the game. Rosalie followed me out to the road as I waited for the hobble with my bag, and this is the bit I've never told anyone straight through. She wasn't performing then. She stood in the dust in her flip-flops, and she said, "Quiet. You think I planned this, and I didn't plan this? I just needed and needed, and you kept saying yes, and I didn't have it in me to make you stop. And I believe that's the truest thing anyone said to me in that whole country. She didn't set a trap. She just never once closed a door, because she couldn't afford to. And I walked through every one of them, holding my wallet open, and called it love. There's blame enough in that to go round twice, and still have some left for the both of us. I got on the back of the bike, and I didn't look back, not because I was hard about it, but because if I'd looked back, I'd have stayed, and staying would have finished me. I moved back into the pension near Robinson's, and then, over about a fortnight, the temperature of the whole thing told me everything the papers hadn't. The good morning texts thinned out. The situations got bigger and more urgent. Then, when nothing came, stopped. Divina messaged me a few times, warmer than ever, right up until she understood the tap was off. And then that stopped too. Rosalie sent me one long message I'll not read out. That was half genuine and half performance, and I've never been able to sort which was which. And maybe it was both. Maybe that's the honest answer about the whole business. That it was both, all the way through, love and a hustle sharing one heart, and I'll never get to split them. Little Jomar's the one that still gets me. He didn't do anything. He just called an old man Granddad, because an old man was there and was kind, and then the old man wasn't there. I sent money for his schooling for a year after, quietly, straight to the school, not the Gcash, because I could, and because a child's not a party to any of it. That's a boundary too. You can be kind on your own terms, through your own hand, or not at all. I stayed on 3 more months, in the pension, on my own. And a strange thing happened. Without a house to pour into and 2 women to referee, I actually saw the place. I'd walk the boulevard of an evening with the whole town, buy a bad cake at Sans Rival, watch the sun go down over the strait toward Cebu. I made a couple of proper friends, a Geordie fella, retired, done it all sensibly, and his Filipina wife of 20 years, who fed me sinigang and told me off like family. That's the other thing they don't put on the YouTube. Plenty of these do work when they're built on level ground instead of a lonely man's fear. I met the ones it worked for. It just wasn't going to be me and Rosalie on that land that way. The Geordie fellow was called Ray, and his wife Marites had his measure completely, and watching the 2 of them was its own kind of education. 22 years married. He'd done it the slow way. Met her when she was working reception at a resort. Took 2 years before a peso changed hands. Met the whole family. Learned enough Tagalog to be laughed at properly. Never built on land he couldn't hold. Kept his pension his own, and gave what he gave with his eyes open and his ledger straight. And they were happy. Genuinely, boringly, beautifully happy. Bickering over the aircon setting like any couple in Whitley Bay. I'd sit at their little table, eating Maritis's sinigang, that sour tamarind soup that I'd have crossed the water for on its own, and Ray would say, "No judgment in it. You went too fast. Bonnie lad, that's all. You led with the wallet because you'd nowt else to lead with, and they can smell that a mile off. And it's not even always cruelty. It's just water finding the low ground. Go slower next time. If there's a next time. And there might be, mind. Don't let this turn you sour like some of these poor sods at the bar." Those poor sods at the bar were their own warning. Every town out there's got them. The bitter expats, red-faced on San Miguel by 11 in the morning, who'll tell you every Filipina's a devil, and every one of them got robbed, and none of them ever once looked at the man in the mirror. I could feel the pull of that chair. It's a comfortable chair, bitterness, lets you off the hook entirely. I decided I'd rather be out about 8 grand and still able to see people straight than sit in that chair for free. That was a choice, and I'm prouder of it than of most things I've done. I stayed the 3 months, and I kept up the school payments for Jomar straight to the school office, which I mentioned. And I'll say again because it matters. You can hold a boundary and still be a decent man. The 2 aren't opposites. Ending the thing didn't mean punishing a 5-year-old in a holy Barcelona shirt for the sins of the grown-ups round him. It just meant the money went where I chose, through my own hand, for a reason I could stand over, instead of into a rota I couldn't see. It just wasn't going to be me and Rosalie on that land that way, and once I'd truly swallowed that, the place stopped being a wound and went back to being what it was, which is one of the loveliest countries on God's earth, full of people mostly trying to get through the week. I rang our Ryan from that pension, told him the lot, more or less, braced for him to call me a stupid old fool. He went quiet. Then he said, "Dad, why didn't you tell us you were that lonely?" And I couldn't answer him, because the true answer was that I'd rather fly to the far side of the world and lose 8 grand than say that sentence to my own son. That's the real story, if you want it. Not the two women, the silence that sent me looking. I'm back in Merthyr now, and I go out twice a year. I've kept a friendship with that Geordie couple, and I've a life out there that's mine, and costs me nothing I can't afford. Our Bethan rings more since it all came out. Funny how nearly making a catastrophe of yourself gets people ringing. I still think about Rosalie. I hope she's all right. I don't think she was wicked. I think she was poor and clever and cornered. And I was a warm door that opened, and both of us used the other for something we were short of, and only one of us could afford the bill. If you're where I was, hear me. Get the land title in your hand before a single peso, and if a foreigner can't own it, that's because a foreigner can't own it, and no amount of love changes the law. Check whether she can even legally marry you. There's no divorce out there, and half the heartbreak on this channel starts there. Never build past the foundation on a promise. Keep your own savings your own. And when two people start working you in shifts, that's not two people who love you. That's a rota. And think with the part of you that isn't lonely. If I could weld that sentence to the inside of every lonely man's skull, I would. I've got the kit for it. I've just not got the man to test it on, but myself. That's Jeff, a welder from Merthyr Tydfil, who flew halfway round the world to be needed and got a hard education for about £8,500, which, as these stories go on this channel, is a bargain. And he knows it. Notice what saved him. It wasn't that he was cleverer than the men who lost the lot. It was that he stopped at the foundation. He asked to see the paper. He found a real lawyer before he wrote the last check, not after. He refused to pick a side and be the prize. Small, unglamorous, tradesmen's decisions. And they kept a roof over his head back home. And notice, too, that he won't hand you a villain. Two women in a poor house up a hill, an ex-husband who vanished, a lonely man with a pension. There's no cartoon in that, just people being short of different things and reaching for whoever was standing near. That's usually how it really is. It's rarely evil. It's nearly always need, meeting need, on ground that was never level. If Jeff's story landed somewhere for you tonight, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've built something on a promise, or nearly did, say so. It helps the next fella more than you know. Look after each other out there, ask the boring questions before the exciting ones, and we'll see you next time. This has been Inside the Philippines.